Hello. In this presentation, we're going to take a very brief look at the history of deaconesses and home missioners in the context of the United States. Now, we need to go back to the origins in the 19th century and remember that it was a time when women were not allowed to be in ministry. Women didn't have rights in society, and the church did not believe that women were called to be in full-time ministries. And yet women, from the very beginning, of course, have felt a calling by God to be in ministry. And so in the 19th century, women were struggling to find ways in which they could fulfill their sense of calling and honor what God was asking them to do. And so this is when you see what I will refer to as women's societies emerge. Women, while not under the direction of the church, organize these societies that will allow them to do ministry in the world. So Methodist women create the Women's Foreign Missionary Society. They create the Women's Home Missionary Society. And here you will find the predecessor origins of the United Methodist Women in the denomination. And at the same time, you have the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was very active in prohibition, anti-alcohol in the United States in the 19th century. And these were all Methodist women who were pursuing missions abroad, missions at home, and this angle of missions to stop alcoholism within the United States, which the women believed was the root cause of a number of social ills. So it wasn't the liquor in and of itself, it was the social ills that were produced from those who used alcoholic beverages. And that's what the women were trying to combat. And so here in the second half of the 19th century, these women's societies begin to allow women avenues for ministry, and in fact, they become very powerful and successful organizations. Now here, we would look at the actual beginning of the deaconess and the deaconess training within the United States. And essentially, there are two different women that begin deaconess training and work almost at the same time. And let me say that these two women didn't always see eye to eye in their understanding of how deaconesses should operate and where they should be located inside the church, outside the church. But in any case, in 1885, Lucy Ryder Meyer in Chicago establishes the Chicago Training School for Deaconesses. They had a very long period of training, and she would then deploy them, send these women out to do work in the urban area as nurses, as educators, attending to the needs of that urban population. So they were very much in ministry in that setting. They lived together as single women. They did not receive salaries, they received room and board, and so it was a great commitment that these women would take on to be a deaconess and to serve God in the late 19th century. Almost at the same time, Jane Bancroft Robinson had an idea for deaconesses as well. Now, she had studied in Europe and got to know well the European model of deaconesses. And when she came back to the United States, she actually worked with the Methodist Episcopal Church to establish a deaconesses bureau within the operation of the church. And in 1888, she became the one who oversaw that particular entity. And their work, again, was very much the same. Women in full-time ministries, unsalaried, with room and board, doing God's work in urban environments, and potentially under the Jane Bancroft Robinson model, potentially as well in foreign settings. And so here we see the origins of the deaconess movement under these two women at the end, toward the end of the 19th century. And it would continue to grow under their leadership over the next couple of decades. Now, as the deaconess movement moves into the 20th century, that original movement peaks in numbers and then begins to decline. And probably the most significant reason for the decline of deaconesses was the fact that the American society was changing. Women got the right to vote. Women were getting more opportunities in the workforce. Women were able to be in ministry within the church in some greater capacities, but also could enter into work on behalf of hurting and suffering people in the world through things like social work. And so as there were more opportunities available for women, there were less of needs for this particular form of lay ministry as originally conceived in the 19th century by Lucy Ryder Meyer and Jane Bancroft Robinson. Now, in more recent years, it became clear that there is a significant place for lay people to be in ministry on behalf of the church in the world. Not everyone feels called to the sacraments or called to preach, but people might feel called to do work on behalf of God in the world. And it became clear that it wouldn't just be lay women, but lay men also had this same kind of calling in the world. And so as the deaconess idea was reestablished, it became deaconesses and home missioners, so that both lay men and lay women could be in ministry full-time in the world. And if you look at your book of discipline in paragraph 1914, you find that most recently deaconesses and home missioners have become an order within the United Methodist Church. It is an order like the order of elders or the order of ordained deacons. The order of deaconesses and home missioners exists to be that community of persons who are in full-time ministries of love, justice, and service in the world. And it allows you to have a support system, companions in ministry, those you can share with on this journey in ministry. And so this is such a wonderful history of how deaconesses arose to meet a need within the church and its outreach in the world, but continues today in its new form to provide significant ministries to a hurting world that needs to know God and the love of Christ.